welcome to tonight's Prayer Spaces sessions. I'm Tim. We're going to be hearing from Gill. So just before we do, let's pause for a moment. We've probably all come from busy days doing the busy things that we do with our day. So as we just sit here and maybe you can look away from the screen or close your eyes, but let's just be still for a moment. And allow some of the stuff that's been happening in the day and the things that we're still thinking about, allow those to fall away for a moment and place ourselves back into God's presence in an intentional way. And so we pray. God, thank you for this opportunity to learn, to hear from one another, to be inspired by what we hear and by you. And so we pray that we would listen well, understand, that you'd help us to grow in our understanding of this work that we do, each of us. In Jesus' name, amen. Right, great. Gill Heron, hello, welcome.
Hi.
To Prayer Space Sessions. Have you dropped in on one of these before? I'm just trying
No, I haven't.
No, okay, right. So,
Sorry, Tim.
A little bit of I'm not going to hide this. So Gill and I know each other because Gill formerly worked in Colchester, where I'm based, and actually worked for the organisation that I worked for a short time. But around that, had done a huge amount of volunteering with us and helping to run prayer spaces, along with Susan, who's also watching today, in on the call today, giving us a little wave there. So, but Gill, where are you? You're not in Colchester anymore. So where are you now?
No, I'm in Cheltenham now. Yes, we moved in COVID, which was not the best time to move, but here we are.
And what caused you to move from Colchester, which is obviously a great place, to Cheltenham, which is probably also a good place, but I can't comment.
Cheltenham's awesome. Lots of coffee shops. We moved with my husband's job. Yeah, he's a vicar in Cheltenham now. Yeah.
And so what's your background to the whole kind of spiritual styles, working with children, prayer spaces, those sorts of things? How did you get into that, and what's your background?
Gosh, my background is as a primary school teacher originally, and I suppose I've been involved in children's work in church probably for about 20, maybe 25 years, starting off doing children's groups. And it was through doing that I came across Rebecca and I at a children's ministry training day many years ago, and was introduced to Godly Play, which was a completely different approach to children's ministry that I'd seen before. So I pursued that a little bit and did a bit of reading around spirituality. Did a bit more training on Godly Play, then trained as a Godly Play teacher in 2008. And so I got into Godly Play, and through that I met Ronnie Lamont, who's based down in Canterbury. And it was through Ronnie and doing one of her courses on children's spirituality that I heard about spiritual styles. And it's like a complete light bulb moment of children and how they connect with God and how God connects with them. And yeah, mind-blowing, I think, and really worth sharing. For prayer spaces, I was going
to say about Godly Play, what was it about Godly Play that for you just it sounds like it was quite a profound moment of understanding and a change of...
It was, yeah, it was totally different. This sort of introducing children via a story, and then the open questions, the wondering questions. If you're familiar with Godly Play, you'll know them as wondering questions. So open questions and encouraging children to explore faith and explore the Bible without without deciding what they're going to learn at the end, without a learning objective. They themselves can wonder about the story, and then you give the opportunity to respond in their own way, whether that be through arts or through reading or through something completely different. Yes, I really like the openness of that approach.
And then prayer spaces, what's been your connection with prayer spaces?
Yeah, well, prayer spaces, I picked up a flyer many years ago at Spring Harvest, and and ended up emailing Phil Togwell, who put me in touch with this organisation called CYO, who were in Colchester. And at this point, we'd moved to about 8 miles north of Colchester. So I met with Tim and went to help at a prayer space in a secondary school in Harwich to experience a prayer space. And from there, I thought, wow, we need this in primary schools. And as I was working in a primary school at the time, the head teacher kindly allowed me to have a day in the hall to host a prayer space for the whole school, which was a bit of a challenge to get the whole school through in one day, but we did manage it. Yeah.
Right. Well, without much further ado, I'm going to let you tell us a little bit about spiritual styles. And folks, I'm going to be sharing a presentation which kind of goes alongside this. So if I click the magic share screen button, there we go. So you should be able to see that. And Gill, just let me know when you want me to nudge things along. And for now, over to you. But just a reminder to people, if you've got questions as you go along, why not stick them in the chat as you think of them? And that way we won't lose your question, and we can come back to those later. So over to you, Gill.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, so the first screen here we've got is just a little representation of spirituality and a bit of my thinking about what that kind of might mean. There's lots and lots of words in there. I've probably missed some, but it's such a massive topic. So we're not going to talk about spirituality this evening, but we're going to talk about spiritual styles. You're probably all familiar with learning styles and personality traits, and in schools we're now quite clued up into using different teaching styles. And it makes sense that we should have our own spiritual styles, our own way of perceiving and connecting with each other, with God and with the world around us. We don't all express our spirituality in a uniform way, but we can, and how we connect with God, it can differ from person to person. Can I spot the screen, please, Tim? Thank you. Our spirituality, it shapes who we are. It's our way of being. It's our way of being in relation to more than ourselves. It's about how we relate to others, how we relate and connect with the world around us, and how we relate to God. It shapes how we experience God, how we express our experience of God, and how we make sense of the world, and we express what we care about. Can move on, thanks, Tim. I was on this course at the St Augustine's College of Theology, which was led by Ronnie Lamont, who was Faith and Nurture Advisor in Canterbury Diocese. And as part of that course, she introduced us to spiritual styles, which came from David Csinos, who's a Canadian theologian. I went to hear Dave speak one time, and he talked about this. It was his, he was an undergraduate, but the actual concept this came from his own personal experience of being in a church with his family as a child and sitting and really engaging with what was going on around him. He was the kind of child who didn't want to go out to hear a story, to colour pictures. He was a child who wanted to stay in the church with his family. He loved the ritual, he loved seeing all the colours, and seeing what was going on within that rich environment. And so his research came from his own experience and thinking, well, is my experience the same for everybody else? Do other people feel the same way? So he started to do some research and he went and he interviewed a lot of children within different church contexts, and he did the research, and then he's produced his book, which you can look at later on to get the whole story. And he came up with 4 different ways that children know and encounter God, and they come under these 4 words: word, emotion, symbol, and action. He spent 6 months doing the research, and in that time he put together all of his research. Okay. Could we move on? Okay. As with learning styles, the one we favour will affect our interaction with the world. We'll move on to the first. So the first learning style that Dave introduces us to is the one of word. This is where to know about God is to know God. This is where language is really important. He discovered that for some children, and we probably realise that for some adults, that words are really, really important. The language that is spoken within a service, the language in books, the accuracy, things need to be accurate and precise. And for a lot of people, that is really important. In a service where the words make sense, then God makes sense and the world makes sense through language. And this isn't in any way linked to emotion. It is precise and logical, and the Bible is central. And for some children, this is true. If you've got children, you may know children for whom they love reading. They love reading Bible stories. They like writing poems. They like creating really intricate prayers to be read out in church. And these are children who probably are word children. These are children who are not engaged with craft. They're not engaged particularly with singing, and definitely not engaged with things like dance and the more sort of creative side of things. Characteristics of somebody who's a word person will be they are very accurate. If you're in a meeting, your word people are probably the ones who like to have all the detail written down. They're possibly the barristers, the accountants that maybe are within your team. They're the ones who want to know everything before they start a new project. They want everything written down and the detail noted before trying something new. Can we move on to the next one, please, Tim? Okay. Our second spiritual style will be emotion. That's not emotional, but it's motion. And for emotion style, this is where what you feel helps you to feel close to God. Not the facts, but how you feel. An emotion person will be very compassionate, relational, and worship is central. So these are the people for whom the music and the art are really important, maybe drama. And they view vocabulary quite differently and use vocabulary quite differently to a word person. These are the children for whom they do love the crafts, they do love the singing and dance and getting involved in the drama. For adults, quite often the emotion people are the ones who enjoy coffee after church, maybe more than the service themselves, because they are relating to people, they're finding out about people's lives, they're having conversations, and that to them is much more important than the accuracy of the words and the Bible readings. So these are the empathetic people within your context. They're very intuitive, they're warm and friendly and very caring. I'm sure you know children like this within your groups who love to get to know other children. They're really friendly and they love to be involved in those creative side of your groups. Okay, we move on please, Tim. Okay, now the symbol's quite different. David Csinos found that for some children, the word and emotion is not them at all. These are the quiet children. For symbol people, it's more about the mystery of God, that God can't be contained within language. Something about silence and pausing and reflective. These are the people who are hardest to find within your church. Sometimes they can be called mountaintop people. So they may actually be out walking their dog on a Sunday morning, out in the countryside and really engaging with God through nature, through taking that time, having that headspace, having that quiet moment, that reflection, and that for them is their time, their spiritual time with God. You probably know children within your context who are quiet, maybe solitary, very reflective. And if you do things like drama and singing and games, they're the ones who may be more hesitant to be involved in that. It's much more meditative, more inward looking. Thank you, Tim. Next one. This is really a whistle-top tour of this. Okay, the final characteristic of spiritual styles is the action. And I put here, what rules? Let's get on with it. And these are your action people, for whom justice is really important. These are people who are doing the work of God, and their spirituality is lived out in all that they do. They don't want to sit in a meeting discussing the detail like the word people do. They're the people who want to get out and get on with it and to make a difference in the world. These are the children who like to get involved in justice, like to get involved in petitions, like to see what difference they can make, and not just sit around, but they want to get on with it. So they're a doing, not saying people. And their characteristics are they're direct. They get things done. Do you know someone like that? I know quite a few people that are action people. Their total focus is on what difference they can make. Thanks, Tim. So, do you recognise yourself here? Maybe you recognise that some of these styles are you. Maybe you're in all of them. So David Csinos says that this is not this is not the be all and end all, and you're not just one spiritual style, but you can be a complete mix. Often folk are more than one style, 2, maybe 3. You might be a really balanced person and have traits of all the 4 styles within your spirituality, but I wonder if you recognise yourself in there. Maybe you are a word person that really gets a lot from Bible readings and preaching and reading and knowledge and knowing God that way. But maybe you're not. Maybe you're the person who's relational and enjoys coffee and compassionate with other people. Or maybe you're not actually in church. You're out walking your dog, spending time alone. I just wonder where you are in this. Thanks, Tim. Okay, so thinking about prayer and prayer spaces, spiritual styles I've found has made quite an impact on me when I've been trying to plan and prepare for prayer spaces, thinking about the way that children respond and how it's helped me to build a prayer space, acknowledging all of those different spiritual styles. So having activities that will engage with children for whom they need words, they need language, and the children who need things to be less formal, they're a bit more creative and expressive. Having activities that will engage with the symbol children, who for them a prayer is more felt rather than doing, and they're more being people. And finally about the action children and how we can engage them in how they can make a difference and how we can empower them to know that even as children they can make a difference in their choices. So hopefully we've got a few examples coming up. Thanks, Tim. Okay, so this is a prayer space. This was my very first prayer space that I did, and we had a homeless box. The children in the school had been thinking about the Send a Cow initiative, and so we included some information about that. And this was one of the responses from one of the children. I want to know how many people in the world don't have a home, and I want to find a way to help. I think that's pretty clear that that's a child with an action spirituality. Okay, thanks, Tim. We always include big questions in a prayer space, and I'm always fascinated by children's questions. They have the best questions. We get questions like, have you got a beard? That's always a good question in the big questions, or who's your mum? But children being able to ask questions is absolutely fundamental, I think, to their spiritual growth. Being able to ask any question they like, and it to be valued. This question here, I like to find out the answer to most things. Big questions made me think, and all the things I don't know and want to find out. The best or really good question I've had actually was in my first prayer space. It was a year 5 girl who asked the question, dear God, how long did it take you to forgive Adam and Eve? That had never occurred to me, but aren't children's questions amazing? And these are the word children. I'm always intrigued in a prayer space when you have a room full of different activities with sparkly lights and sand and Play-Doh, and all kinds of tactile, creative things. And you ask a child, what was your favourite activity? And they'll say, I liked writing questions, or I liked writing a prayer. And those are your word children. Thanks, Tim. Don't you love this picture? I think it's one of my favourite pictures, this young man engaging with forgiveness stones. In this activity, you sit and hold a stone and you think about forgiveness and who you might need to forgive, somebody who might have hurt you in some way. And then the opportunity is there to drop your stone into a bucket of water. For some people, that's nothing. My husband is not a symbol person, and that for him would not be an activity that would engage with. But for others, that's a really big deal to actually engage with the topic of forgiveness and then to drop a stone into the water as an act saying, yes, I forgive. Thanks, Tim. Okay, so in this activity, it's a new world activity, and so the idea of this one is there's three questions. So if you were in charge of a new world, what would you keep, what would you change, and what rules would you have? And it's really interesting to talk to children. They are really on the ball about the world, and they're really on the ball about justice and environment, and they are really keen to make a difference. And the quote from this particular prayer space was, it made me think what I could do to change the world. I think it's really key that we do help children to know how they can change things, give them chance and opportunities to find ways to volunteer, to help them to make a difference. Thanks, Tim. The prayer wall. This is an opportunity for children to write their prayers. And don't they love writing prayers? I find this is an activity that all children engage with. Some of them draw their prayers, the little ones, but others write them. It is calm writing down your prayer and saying it. There's a picture that I'm not showing tonight of a young man, and I've got a photo of him writing down his prayer, and he's a young man I know quite well, and he really hates singing. He really hates dancing. In fact, he doesn't do much talking to you, but he really loved writing his prayer in the prayer space. And he says it was because he didn't have to tell anybody about it. He could do his own thinking, but he didn't have to say what he was writing. He didn't have to talk about it at all. He was a simple child, engaging with word. Thanks, Tim. The priorities activity, well, you can see the activity on the screen there. Choose the 6 which are most important to you and make a pyramid. And this particular young man that I was with, these were his ones. Joy, good health, peace are more important to me than being famous or a successful career, because they don't necessarily make me happy. But within the same class of children, there was another young man I spoke to, and his choices were good education and lots of money and traveling widely. So he had a completely different response to that prayer space than this young man did. And I think that's interesting in a prayer space, that children do respond in different ways to the activities that we lay out, and depending upon their spiritual style, you will get a different response. Thanks, Tim. Identity beads. The creative beads, let me show what I like without talking what I'm sad about. These beads, it was a table full of colourful beads, and the children were invited to think about who they were and other people, and how they were the same as other people and how they were different. And we were celebrating the differences and their imagination, and they were allowed to be creative. They could make whatever they wanted with these little coloured stones. There were lots of pictures made. We had rainbows, and we had one young man in one school who spent quite a long time dividing all the colours up. So he made a pile of white and a pile of red and then a pile of blue. And I was chatting to him and I said, oh, what have you been doing with the colours? And he said, well, all these colours represent my emotions. And so I said, well, you've got quite a lot of red there. He had a really big pile of red. And he said, well, that represents my anger because I'm really angry inside. And that was quite interesting because I had a chance to chat with his class teacher and she would never have known that was how he felt about himself and the world. But she was enabled to continue that conversation with him at a later time and to know that. And that's the marvelous thing about prayer space, is that you get these opportunities for children to express themselves that would never be there at any other time in their school day. That chance to stop and reflect. And the emotion child, you could make things which made me feel creative, like God was when he made the earth. There's your emotion child. Thanks, Tim. And finally, and it really, really was a quick tour through spiritual styles because we've got a lot to get through. This is just an aid to our understanding the different ways that people know and experience God. It's not the be all, it's not the end all. But it helps us to think about style rather than age. I think when we're working with young people and with children, we can sometimes put them into boxes and think, oh, they will like that activity or they will like this activity, and the adults will prefer something different. Well, maybe they wouldn't. Maybe there are children who actually would like to engage more with the word style, who might like to stay within a church service rather than go out and do something different. Spiritual styles helps us to understand each other. And interestingly, how conflicts occur. If you have a word person and an emotion person in the same meeting, they can often have conflict because they come at things from completely different points of view. And but knowing that can really help you. Going back to godly play, the godly play actually enables all of these styles. And that's what I so love about it. You have the word, you have the introducing of the story or something about the liturgy or learning about communion and baptism. But you have the wondering, you have the reflection, the opportunity to ask questions. And then you have a chance to respond to that in the way that suits you, not in the way that the teacher has decided. So godly play enables all of these styles. And as people who work with children, knowing about this can help us to shape our environment so that people of all spiritual styles can feel a sense of fit and inclusion. And to quote David Csinos, no one size fits all. But finally, I think looking at this verse from Mark 12, I think we might have thought we'd thought this up, but actually I think God was there first, which says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. Well, if that's not 4 spiritual styles, then I don't know what it is. And finally, if you're interested in any of this, then I do go and find out some more. These books are absolutely brilliant. Children's Ministry That Fits is David Csinos' work, so you can read the whole book if you really want to. If you want to read a little bit more about godly play, about spiritual styles, about intergenerational worship, then I would really recommend Faith in Children by Ronnie Lamont. She has a chapter on spiritual styles, which is nice and neat and concise to read through. And Children's Spirituality by Rebecca Nye, absolute must read if you're interested in children's spirituality. That would be my first go-to book to have a look at. Really wise writing there from Rebecca. And I wanted to share with you this little resource here, which I've only just discovered. You may well have come across it before. It's Following Jesus, Next Steps to Following Jesus by Joanne Gilchrist. And I've only just been chatting with Joanne online because she's written this book, and it's got stories in the Bible in, and it's got 4 different pathways for exploring the Bible stories. And those pathways are think, feel, get active, and create. And having written this book, Joanne then came across Dave Csinos' work on spiritual styles. And they're a pretty good match. So we're going to actually start using these to give back to some families that come in as a takeaway to use with their children as they get a little bit older. If you like to look things up online, then there are a few places to go to. Roots on the web. If you're a user of Roots on the web, you might notice that all their activities are labelled with E, W, S or A. They're all categorising which spiritual styles. If you're using their material and putting together your groups, then you can pick different activities for different styles. That's really worth looking at. They've also got quite a lot of the information about David Csinos's writings and research on there too. Going for Growth, which is Mary Hoare's website, is also worth looking at for more information on spirituality and spiritual styles. If you're on Facebook, the Spiritual Child Network is worth checking out, as well as Godly Play UK. There'll be Godly Play training days coming up, I'm sure in your area, if you're interested in pursuing that a bit more. And if you'd actually like to hear Dave Csinos speak himself, then check out the YouTube link that's there, and you can actually hear straight from him himself. Thank you, Tim. Was that quick enough?
That was brilliant. Thank you, Jill. Yeah, no, that was the perfect length. Yeah, really helpful to hear all that again. Okay, I'm going to drop that screen away. We will send you those links and things in a follow-up email after this. So if you didn't get them, didn't jot them down at the time, and that's okay, they'll come out. Right, we'd like to give you 10 or 12 minutes just to have a chat with people in breakout rooms. So I hope you're comfortable with that. If you're happy to let other people chat, then that's absolutely fine. So there's no compulsion for people to have to be all extrovert when they'd like to just sit there and listen to others. Introduce yourselves just a little, just so people know who you are. But sometimes randomly wonderful things happen in breakout rooms. You just tend to find you're linked up with people who are doing the thing that you want to know how to do, or you know how to do the thing that they are desperate to find out how to do, or you've got some stories that you need to share with each other, in which case do make most of that. But otherwise, perhaps have a chat about the spiritual styles, so your understanding of spiritual styles, as we've heard from Jill there, and how that might work in the prayer spaces that you're running. And if you've got any questions, if you'd like to save those up for when we come back, and we'll see if we can answer them before we finish at 8:30. So, Nay, if you'd like to catapult us into breakout rooms, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes. Thanks very much. Welcome back, everyone. Yeah, we stopped the recording. We had a little chat. So, hang on, I've lost the chat thingy function. Here we go. So, I hope that was helpful. I had a great catch up in the room I was in. We, as a team here in Colchester, where I was working, when we were introduced to the idea of spiritual styles, what was helpful for us as a team working in schools, team of about 5 of us, was we started to understand each other and ourselves better, and what spiritual styles were most us and what were least us, and particularly what was the style that kind of stirred us. And so some of us were more stirred by symbol and by mystery, and some of us were more stirred by emotion and need and that sort of thing, and others were particularly stirred by action, like, well, what are we going to do about this then? Let's get on and do it. But recognizing that among ourselves was so helpful. And if you've worked in teams, you might have done other kind of type indicators that you can use to analyze yourselves as a team. But we found it was so simple. It's spiritual, so it kind of touches on the most profound level of who we are and how we are. And it really helps us to understand each other, even if we were still slightly infuriated by each other sometimes. It doesn't deal with that, but it does help you to understand. And that was particularly helpful once we got into a pandemic and we were all having to negotiate with each other over Zoom, funnily enough, and just managing each other's expectations and ability to focus on things and get things done. So yeah, we found it super helpful just as a team of adults trying to work with children and young people in schools. Thoughts from anybody around? Yeah. What's comments? Ooh,
I really love it.
yeah.
I think it's really helpful, just not even for children's spirituality, just for everyone around. It's like you have ways of, like, within a prayer space, it's good to have these different themes around me and myself, me and others, me and God, different learning styles. But this just gives it an extra layer, I think, even in communicating, which totally makes sense. Obviously, it makes sense, but to have something that's kind of formed, I think is really helpful to take into conversations with schools, or I think it's actually something we could all do with probably exploring more, as you said, Tim, like as adults and as individuals, because I think actually prayer in itself historically has just been words for so many of us, but actually what freedom I think this could mean for a lot of people if they understood it, around how they pray. It's what we offer children in schools, but I think it's what the world needs. It's what churches across the board need, that kind of liberation of spiritual styles in them to help them pray more. So I think it's great.
I think it probably is something that's almost the DNA of prayer spaces, in that we've tried to give those experiences of prayer in a very different way, haven't we, through prayer spaces? What I really like is when you're planning a prayer space, I've tended to say, or think about the wow, sorry, thank you, please. But actually, these are quite helpful to say, have I got something there that enables children to experience God in a way that meets their spiritual style? It's another way of putting a balance in, isn't it? So that we don't just put the kind of things that appeal to us. I think it's really helpful. I'll be taking that forward, definitely.
We do tend to see things through our own lens, don't we? So if you're an emotion person, that can be your tendency to do prayer spaces, and that could be your style. But remembering to fit in all four is really important.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. That was the thing about team. It was partly awareness of how we see the work or what we're doing through our own style, and recognizing that, but then giving us a language for actually being able to articulate that. And it, Dawn, you posted just a comment to me in the chat. Are you happy to share that as a idea of a question? Would that be all right? So I think it could be really helpful. You'll need to unmute. Ooh. There we go.
Sorry, I thought you were going to say the question.
No, I'd love to hear it from you.
Well, it's the negative side of this, because things are awesome and wonderful, but there's often the flip side. So how do we deal with the negative aspects of spirituality that come our way? Things like fear and punishment and sin, which is a word I rarely use with the children. I tend to say wrongdoings. But those kind of aspects that can make children afraid to speak up or to participate sometimes.
Thank you. That's a really helpful question. I don't know, Jill, do you want to?
I think we need, when we're planning our prayer spaces, and we know our children, and then we know when they're coming in, and I think if we create a space that is safe, a place where they can think, or they can write down, and their answers are not going to be read out to anybody else. Anything they write down is not going to be shared.
Oh, no, it's about their willingness to participate.
Okay. Are you talking about children who prefer not to take part at all? I've had children who've come in and wandered around and not wanted to take part, and then eventually they have, after they've settled down, after about 10 minutes, they then started to take part, and then they've come back later on.
Yeah. I've had a couple of examples. One was in secondary school, a year 8 boy who absolutely did not want to engage with the space at all. So he had already in his mind sort of consigned it to something I do not do. And so he just sat down on the floor, leaned against the cupboard. And I went over and sat next to him, and just chatted with him for most of the lesson and just had a conversation with him, and he was happy to do that. But he didn't want to take part in any of the activities. I wonder whether that's maybe a small example of what you're considering, which is somebody that comes in and just, in a negative way, they do not want to engage in any kind of way with this at any spiritual level, however you might try and define it. In that case, I think it's not the stuff, it's the people in the room that makes the difference, and that's why it's always helpful to have somebody from the team who is just able to sit and be with the child, and sometimes that welcome, that warmth can be the thing that opens them up and gives them a permission to try things. The other thing I want to say is that's thing one. The thing two that I wanted to say is that sometimes I think I'll say to students or pupils that are very wary of what's in the room, I'll say, first of all, you don't have to do anything, just go and have a look. Just have a look around. If you want to, you could read some of what some other people have done, but you don't have to do anything unless you feel comfortable doing that. And just having that permission to be able to go around and to look for themselves, once they've kind of opened the door a chink, it's amazing how they'll kind of push through it and they'll begin to do it. But again, that's a people thing. It's how we engage with them as people, but giving them the space to engage at whatever spiritual style they feel they can offer to what they see in the room. And sometimes that's just go and have a look, go see. I don't know. Does that help, Dawn? Is that?
Yes, it does.
Thank you to Janet from Inspire in Cambridge. So we need to remember that we are guests in each school, and so we're subject to their rules about discrimination too. So yeah, we go as guests. We want to be good news people in school. That means the school needs to see good news as well. Claire from Kettering said, do you think there's any merit in planning prayer spaces with children? So this is probably our final question, because we're sort of running over now. But yeah, Jill, planning a prayer space with children.
Wonderful, absolutely.
I just think if you could get a group of children that represent the different spiritual styles, you've almost got a test then, haven't you, before you even, and they might suggest something that you haven't thought of. I don't know, sometimes I find if I'm planning something, I'm trying to second guess, not using them as guinea pigs or anything like that, but it would be lovely if you had children facilitating prayer spaces for their peers in schools, I think.
I think that would be marvellous. One thing is I do when I do prayer space, if I get the year sixes to go around the prayer space with early years and year one, practical reason to overcome any reading difficulties on the instruction cards, but for them to experience a prayer space with a younger child is quite a different experience to experiencing for themselves, and explaining what each activity is about. But to have some children to actually plan, and yes, wonderful.
Yeah, fabulous. Right, we're going to officially pause at that point, because we've got to 8:30, and we say we're going to finish at 8:30. However, we will keep the Zoom meeting open for about another 10 minutes if anybody wants to hang around. But we'll kind of officially call things to a halt. Just to remind you, our next one of these, we've been talking a lot about primary school, and there's a lot of prayer spaces happening in primary school, and what happens there is wonderful. But next time, on Monday, the 3rd of July, we're going to be doing one of these with a focus on FE. So that's Key Stage 5. So that will be sixth formers or colleges or FE colleges. There's a bit of stuff happening there, and we know that when prayer space is happening in FE colleges, they work really, really well. They can have a huge impact on young adults. But we'd like to give some special time to people who are working in that sector. So if you're working in that sector, we'd love to see you if you have a connection with that. If there are people from your church who are involved in FE as staff or as visitors or as guests or as chaplains, please encourage them to join up with that. And we'll have something more of a kind of round table kind of approach, just to hearing a bit from FE, sharing some ideas, and seeing what we can do to encourage people who are connected with further education to run great prayer spaces for the people that are there. We've known from running them here in Colchester, we know that there are students that, because we've been running them for long enough, we know there are students that have been in a prayer space in a primary school, and then they go through secondary school and they see them, and then they get into the sixth form college and they go, oh right, oh yeah, we had this, and they know and love prayer space and they engage with it again. So we know it's something that people don't grow out of. They don't grow out of exploring prayer, so that's great. So that'll be about FE. So if you're connected with FE, please join up for that one. And then we'll all go on holiday in the summer. So that's that for that. Do check out our stories, our website. If you haven't recently, we're adding updates every week. There's new stuff on there. You can follow us on social media as well, on Instagram and Facebook. Naomi does an absolutely outstanding job of keeping all the content up to date, posting relevant stories and that. And if you've run a prayer space, we'd love to hear from you. Well, first of all, we'd love it if you can register. If you have fallen out of the habit of registering your prayer spaces, then please do register them. It helps us to know where prayer spaces are happening, where people are doing brilliant stuff, and you might find that we drop you an email to say, could you write us a story about it? We'd love to share your story with more people so that the inspiring work that you're doing might inspire others. So that's about it. Send your story to Naomi. She wants to hear from you. Again, let's just pause. I'm going to pray and then dismiss us so we can go back to our evenings. But if you want to hang on for a little bit after that, you're very welcome. So let's just be still again for a moment. Thank you, Lord, for the way that you make us and shape us, for the way that you make us different and you shape us differently, and you call us into relationship with you and into your service. And I thank you for this fantastic reminder in the Gospels about how we are to love you. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. Lord, help us to love you like that. Amen.